Hey everyone, my name is Hackney. I'm a techno and house music DJ and producer, and today I want to show you how to build a high quality mastering chain for free. Let's get into it. So many of you are probably like me, you're in your bedroom, or in my case, my living room, and you're self-releasing tracks and you want them to sound as good as possible whilst not spending hundreds or thousands of pounds on software or hardware, but you still want them to sound professional. Well, it can be done. So I have two mastering chains set up, my main one and an alternative one. And I know what you're thinking, some of these plugins aren't free, and you're right. So let me go through them and explain. So starting at the top, we have Lufticus, which is an analog style EQ, which is really nice at bringing the top end out in a mix. It's got an analog emulation switch and a gain match button, which is really ideal for mastering. And this plugin is completely free. There's no caveats, there's no strings attached or anything. It's just a straight download from the internet, and I would highly recommend it. Now moving on to the second thing in the chain is where things start to get a little bit complicated. We have Ozone 9 Elements. Now strictly, this is not a free plugin, this is a paid plugin, but it does become free fairly regularly. So if you look on plugin websites around Christmas or Black Friday, chances are you might be able to pick this up for free. Now at this stage in the mastering chain, I'm using this purely for the EQ and the imager. I'm not using it for the limiter yet, but we'll start with the EQ, and what I use it for specifically, rather than using just the stock EQ in Logic, I like to use it for soloing bands. So for example, here you can see, if we just switch this into there, we can see that I'm soloing this band, and you can solo this one as well. Now the stock EQ plugin in Logic does not allow you to solo bands, but there are two free alternatives for this. Specifically the M equalizer from the Melda Productions free bundle allows you to solo bands, and as does the Ableton's EQ8. So if you're an Ableton user, you can do basically everything that this EQ already does. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm a Logic user, so I have to suffer with my stock EQ plugin not having the ability to solo bands. I'm sure that's coming though. Secondly, I'm using Ozone Elements for the imager. Now, in fact, Ozone actually give away their imaging plugin completely for free. So what I would recommend is just go and get this plugin, and then you don't need to worry about getting Ozone Elements for free whenever it does become available. Now, what I also use this EQ for is midside, and this is something that you can actually do in virtually all stock EQ plugins. For example, if we come to Logic here, we can process this in stereo, left, right, mid, and then if we wanted to, we would just need to add in another EQ plugin, and we just set this ones to the side, and then right there we have mid-side, which is exactly what we can do here as well. Now moving on to the next plugin in this list, which is another controversial and probably more controversial than Ozone 9, is the Shadow Hills mastering compressor. Now this certainly isn't free, this is a $300 mastering compressor, but this was available for download last April when iZotope and Native Instruments and a few other sound companies created Soundwide and gave away some plugins for free, including this $300 mastering compressor. Now, this compressor is completely unnecessary unless you know how to use it, which, to be honest, I don't really at this stage. I'm getting there with learning it and how to get the most out of it, but it really is taking some time, which is to be expected for a $300 legendary mastering compressor. Now, for some alternatives for this, what I was using before this plugin became available for free was just Logic's own SSL bus compressor emulation. Now, this is a really good plugin, and what I really like is the 3 distortion modes that come with it. If you put this on any sort of bus or any drum bus, lead bus, or just use it in your mastering, adding a little bit of distortion, a little bit of gain, that can really add some nice sort of harmonics and some overtones. It can really do a lot to your sound, which is to be expected for an SSL emulation. Now in Ableton, for example, you can use their glue compressor, which works in a similar way and has similar effects. Whilst it's not specifically based on an old vintage bus compressor like this one is, it will still do a very good job of sort of gluing your mix together before sending it into the multiband compressor, which we'll move on to now. Now for this, I'm just using Logic's own very old looking, very sort of Logic 8 or Logic 9 looking multiband compressor. Now the good thing about this compressor is that it's very functional in that it's just a simple 4-band compressor, multiband compressor. It's not doing anything funny to the harmonics, it's not trying to color the sound or anything, it's just a very clean sounding compressor. Now I know a lot of people have Exifer's OTT multiband compressor, and you could certainly use it at this stage as a multiband compressor. Ableton's multiband compressor works in a very similar way to OTT, so if you're an Ableton user, you can certainly use that. Now this is a stage where you could spend a lot of money on a high-end multiband compressor, There are plenty out there, and a lot of money could be sunk for more control over the different bands and different compression types. But if you're at the stage where you feel like you need to upgrade your multi-band compressor to do more than what this is doing and more than what the Ableton one is doing, or perhaps even more than what OTT is doing, then chances are you can probably afford to spend the couple of $100, couple of £100, couple of €100 on a very good multi-band compressor. And chances are you're probably going to see some sort of return on that investment anyway, so it probably will be worth your time. But for us sort of bedroom and living room producers, we're probably not at that stage yet, so using the stock multi-band compressors are just as good. Moving on to the penultimate plugin here, we have the Softube saturation knob. Now this one is certainly free. Unfortunately, you do need to register it with iLok, which is a bit of a pain, but for a saturation plugin, it's my favorite. I put it on everything, to be honest. Using it on things like your drum bus or a lead bus, like if you have it on a drum bus and you want to sort of beef up your kick, set it to the low setting and just increase it, and you'll find that the body of the kick and the real sort of bottom end of the kick really come up. Or if you really want to emphasize maybe the sort of the crunch of the snare on the drum bus, yeah, you can stick it on the high setting and it will really emphasize those hi-hats or the sort of real crack of the snare. But for just using in mastering, just if you leave it on the neutral setting and just give it a little bit of a boost, you start to get sort of those analog crackles, and a little bit more body comes out of the bottom end as well, and it just sort of boosts a little bit of everything quite equally, and it's really, really nice. There are tons of free saturation plugins out there. You could do an entire video on just free saturation plugins alone, and it will be a 10 to 20 to 30 minute video. There are simply so many out there, and I'm sure you have your favorites, so whichever you have, as long as it's sort of broadband, then go and use it. Finally, moving over to the last one, we have Ozone Elements again. Now for this, we are just using the limiter. Ozone's limiter is particularly good, but not completely necessary. If you're fairly new to limiting, stock limiters are probably just about good enough, as long as they have true peak detection and sort of envelope controls. Logic and Ableton's limiters are plenty good enough for this and will do a perfectly fine job for what you want to be doing. But like multi-band compressors, you can spend an absolute fortune on very good limiters that have more sophisticated internals that are designed for mastering, which is kind of what Ozone Limiter is designed for. Specifically, you can see rather than having sort of attack, decay and release of a limiter, it's just got a slow and a fast control, as well as having transient emphasis and some stereo independence here as well. These are things you don't get on a regular stock limiter. For example, if we have a look at Logic's, you can see we have gain, the release, which isn't actually on Ozone itself, but is sort of bundled into the fast and slow character, and probably a little bit of the transient emphasis as well. The output level we have here as well, the ceiling. Look ahead, again, which is probably bundled in with the character and the transient emphasis. True peak detection is on both of them. They've got two different modes, which they also have here, but the two modes are slightly differing. And if you have the full version of Ozone, you get a whole bunch of different more modes as well. Another particularly nice feature that you'll struggle to get with some free plugins or stock plugins are things like gain match, swapping the stereo fields, and monoing the entire master, sorry. Now these tools are certainly sort of mastering specific really, so this is why they come bundled in with things like Ozone, and you may struggle to find alternatives. But as I said, Ozone Elements does become free fairly regularly, so keep an eye out on places like Plugin Boutique, Plugin Alliance, plenty of other places like that, and you'll be able to pick up something like Ozone Elements for free, and I'd highly recommend you do. Now moving on to the final free plugin in your mastering chain is the Ulean Loudness Meter. Now you need to know how loud your track's going to be, don't you? LUFs are sort of all the rage at the moment with measuring your track's loudness, comparing it to other tracks, seeing if you're getting that overall loudness compared to a professionally released track. So I've got a track playing in the background here, and as you can see, it is measuring how loud the track is simply. Now, whilst I'm not a mastering pro, I do understand sort of what all of these figures mean. The key one here is the integrated measurements, as that is kind of the whole sort of complete rating or measurement for your track. As you do more and more mastering, you start to see patterns in sort of which tracks give you sort of which kind of measurement, whether it's you've got a very sort of more laid back track that has a higher dynamic range and maybe a higher loudness range as well, or if you've got a very sort of club-based track where the average dynamics are going to be very small and the integrated measurement are going to be very high. You'll start to learn a lot more about what these measurements do the more mastering you do. Now what you can do is pay for this plugin. by Pro, as you can see, and it'll give you some extra features, but to be honest, the free version is absolutely fine. It gives you everything that you need in order to actually measure your tracks, and I would highly recommend it as the final thing to put in your mastering chain. That just about wraps up this video. I hope this helps some of you who are new to mastering and are not sure how to go about building a mastering chain, but if there is one thing I want you to take away from this video, let it be this: you don't need iZotope Ozone. It's not the be-all and end-all of mastering. There are other ways around it, as I have shown you. If you found this video useful, please give it a like and please subscribe for more music production videos in the future. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!